to say it scared me was probably an understatement. I had this enormous sense of, am I God? Imposter syndrome, if you've heard that concept before. It's like, what in the world can I share with you all that might be meaningful, that's not boring? And so if you think about it, and we have a former registrar here in the audience right now, the work that I do can seem really boring. And I thought about, do I come and do I share cool things about, why you come to higher ed, what we do to help support you in higher education, to help you get your dreams? And I think you guys hear that all the time from so many different places. And so as I really debated, I affectionately call this talk my 2 o'clock talk. And that means 2 a.m. And I'm not a morning person, and I get my sleep, and 2 o'clock is a precious time for me. And but for the last couple months, as I've been thinking about and dreaming about what I would share with you, I just kept wondering, what could I share that would be meaningful? And I would listen to talks, and I would read, and I would go through some books and that kind of stuff. And what I found happening during that process is, while I was hearing somebody else tell their story, I got lost in my own story, the story about today. And I would wake up, the last month and a half, I would wake up randomly at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and ideas would start to flow about what to share and what to think about and how to craft it. And what was so meaningful for me in this experience is, as I was exploring and discovering, I still to this day, I don't remember what all those authors said in their books or in their podcasts or that I read, but I remember how I felt. And so as we visit today, my dream is actually the same thing. My dream for you all is, I hope that you don't remember me and the presentation. That's not the point of this. My dream and the outcome for this is that as we talk and we talk about ideas about how you create your story, that will be meaningful for you, and those ideas and those promptings and those thoughts that come to your mind, I hope that those are the things that you remember from today. And so as we talked before, I am very much a proud Badger. I am so grateful for being here. And as I was exploring what to research, I really got touched. I just jumped on your website, and I was just like, okay, let's see what's going on with Snow College right now. And I saw this tagline, this theme that has right now is that great stories start at Snow. And the second I read that, that's what connected with me, because my story, I'm not saying it's great. In fact, you'll learn that it's, but my story started here. My career, my passions, the things that I fell in love with in this business happened because I showed up here. And so I'm so grateful for it. I thought it was just such a really cool theme. And so as we talk about this today, it's really funny because this is really about helping you and inviting you to think about how you create your own story. And so as I say that, I'm going to be really stupid, and I'm going to switch that, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to tell you about my story. But my story is about triggering ideas about your story. So selfishly, I want to tell you a couple of key things just about my background. I call them pivot moments. There are activities in my life that I experienced and I ran into that completely changed my trajectory. And I thought it would be helpful, at least from a career standpoint. I've also had personal ones. But from a career standpoint, there are 3 really meaningful experiences for me. And I thought I'd share those, and I call them pivot moments. And I'm hoping as we talk through this that you might think of some of your own pivot moments. But so the first one that I wanted to highlight here and talk about is, so Dave, he was cautious to date me, he said. 27 years ago that I started working at Snow College. I talked about the website. One of my funny claim to fames about Snow College is I helped create a couple of us storyboard and build out Snow College's first website. That tells you how old I am when I was working here in the 90s. I also did really strange things, like one day I was over in Price on a business trip, on a recruiting event, and I thought, maybe I'll take Skyline Drive over and create a shortcut. Well, it rained. I was in a school minivan. Have you ever been on Skyline Drive? You know that you can, in really good four-wheel drive cars, make it through there. Anyway, I was stuck for several hours. Some folks from Gabeek went past the horseshoe and came and rescued me and towed me off the mountain. I have a lot of really fond memories here, and it's just fun. But so I want to share a couple of these cool pivot moments. The first one for me that really has impacted and driven my life, in 1986, I was a junior in high school. Actually, I was a senior in high school, and this is probably November, maybe early December. And it probably shouldn't surprise you, and I should not have been surprised that lack of attendance in school makes it difficult to complete school. And somehow that didn't register very much for me. I kind of thought about it. And I got called into my high school counselor's office. And technically, it's the second time I'd ever met him. I met him once when he signed me up for classes, but it's the second time I met him. And he sat me down, and it was very kind of this really formal. I felt like I was in a closet-sized office with him. And he said, "Mark," he said, "what's going on with you?" He didn't phrase it that way, but that's how I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was asking. And he said, "Why are you such a loser? You don't go to school. You're here to, he says, "Do you know why you're here?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, you're kind of being a loser. You were not attending school. You're here today where I'm walking over to the vice principal's office, and we're going to kick you out of school." For a long time, I considered myself a high school dropout until I studied and learned that I wasn't a dropout, I was a force out. It's the second time I met my high school counselor. And it was such an interesting experience, and literally still etched in my mind the story of his. He says, "You'll be lucky as a loser to work at Texaco." So it was quite a pivotal moment for me. You can imagine that. I had an amazing rescuer, my mother, who worked at Salt Lake Community College and found a program. Again, this is back before concurrent enrollment existed and anything else. And my mother found ways to help me through the school district to be able to take classes at the college and then transfer them back to high school so I could graduate and get my high school diploma. The rules were so stringent at that time, I couldn't graduate until a year after my class did because they didn't want to reward losers like me and graduate on time with your class and have that celebration. I had to have a punishment, and so I had to wait a year to graduate. Anyway, you think about this experience. I have to tell you a funny anecdote. Imagine 6 years later working for Snow College as the director of admissions, recruiting in the high school, and happening to run into that same high school counselor. It was a very impactful moment for me, just to say the least. The reason why I tell this story is not woe is me and everything else. I definitely deserved it. I earned it. I walked the walk to not be ready to graduate. He walked me across to the vice principal. The vice principal sat me down and he said, "Here's the form." They didn't invite my parents. My parents had no idea. They gave me a form, asked me to sign it, and that was it. And I walked out. And that's the last time I went to my high school. But the reason why I tell you this story is because as I have gone through my life, I have realized how pivotal that moment is for me and how impactful that has been in every aspect of my life, in my social, in my family relationships, in my personal goals, in my career goals. I have, as I've thought about my career aspirations, that moment is what I go to where I have to prove to myself that I'm not stupid. I knew I wasn't. I was a terrible kid. I mean, 1 year in junior high, this is how bad I was. 1 year in junior high, I was messing with my parents because I was independent. I was going to do what I wanted. I failed 3 semesters in a row until my parents stopped nagging me about not doing well in school. The fourth quarter, they finally stopped talking about it, so I got straight A's just to mess with them. And so it wasn't that I was stupid. In fact, I've learned later there are different diagnoses and different, as educators, we talk about underachiever syndrome and different things like that. I've learned maybe I was in a different category. I wasn't stimulated in school, that kind of stuff. The things weren't really motivating me. But I enjoyed goofing off. That was my thing. And so, and my wife wanted me to make sure I put in a caveat here. I wasn't out doing really stupid things. I didn't go to jail for anything I did. I just didn't go to school and I goofed off. But it has been a source of my motivation my whole life, to the point where sometimes it's challenging because as I've looked through my career and my life outcomes with my family, my children, my community work, and my employment, my volunteer stuff, my fun. Every time I set a goal and I'm trying to accomplish something, when I achieve it, my wife has been very good to caution me. She says, "You're already unhappy because you're focused on the next thing. You don't step back and just sit in it for a moment and celebrate what you've accomplished." It's that motivation that came from this pivot moment. You're a loser who will be lucky to work at Texaco. That really has driven me, and it continues to drive me to this day. I try to manage it much better and to leverage it in a healthy way, but it still is core to me and my motivation. So my second story, one of the greatest successes I had here at Snow College is we were admissions. We created a really unique and at the time, very innovative admissions process where we would go out to our local feeder high school, 6-county area. We would go out and we would do recruitment events, and we would set everything up so that we could visit with students at a moment. We could admit them on the spot. If they had all the qualifications, we would fill it out. They would pay the application fee. We would admit them on the spot, and through an interview, if they qualified for our scholarships, we awarded a scholarship at that moment. It was really, really incredible, and that was truly benchmark, really cool thing that nobody else was doing yet. And it differentiated what Snow College was doing, and it told our students that we cared about them. So I'm sitting out at Delta High School. Do we have any Delta rabbits here? All right. I was out at Delta High School, a really cool place. And we did this event. We were in their library. And so the library has some couches in different places, obviously all their rows of books. They had tables set up with chairs that was organized. And for about an hour and a half, 2 hours that evening, a group of us were just interviewing students and talking with people, talking with their parents if they chose to came. And as I sat there, I noticed a student kind of sitting a little bit in the corner. He was a little bit out of my light zone, so to speak, a corner of my eye kind of a thing. And I noticed him just kind of leaning in and listening a little bit. And the longer I talked with different students, I heard him listening more and more. And so I reached out to the high school counselor and just asked her, I said, what do you know about this student? He seems to be interested. Why won't he come over and talk to us? Because it was a free game. Anybody could come and talk at any time. And so she told me a little bit about his background. He came from a very poor, poverty-leveled family. There wasn't much higher, even high school education in his home. He was the first or one of the first to graduate. I think most of his siblings were going to graduate high school, but education was not a priority in their home. And so she talked about some of the poverty issues he was facing, food insecurity issues, those kind of things. And I said, do you think you'd be interested in talking? She says, let's try. So she went and grabbed him, invited him, asked him if he'd be willing to come over and visit. And he and I sat down. And as we talked and I got to know him a little bit, I asked him, I says, what do you think about college? And he says, Mark, I could never go. I could never meet the rules and the requirements. I wouldn't qualify. Nobody would admit me. And I says, well, I control that. So let's talk about it. Do you want it? What would you like to do? And he says, I can't afford this. And in about a 20-minute conversation, working with the counselors, they went into their high school records and were able to verify the income issues and everything else. I was able to work with this student. We sat down, I gave him an admissions letter, and we were able to find funds to help him be able to afford both his tuition, but also some funds for some housing so he could afford to be here. I left that meeting on an absolute high. It was one of the coolest experiences, and it's something that really, really influenced me in my admissions and my recruitment and even in my enrollment management experience. I was so excited. I was so proud of it. Well, step forward about 10 years, and I was the director of a national association called ACRO, one of their conferences. And I'm standing up at this conference. There's about 800 people in there. I'm talking about the awesome work we get to do to help students succeed. And I'm just so excited about it. And I shared this story with this student at Delta High School. And as I'm telling the story, you know how when you talk, you have an inner dialogue going on in your head? And you have conversations with yourself and you're thinking about it? Promise me, I hope all of you do that because it happens to me all the time. Otherwise, I'm really weird, which is still probably true. But in this inner dialogue, I'm sitting here, I'm telling this story, and it was just kind of like, all of a sudden, I'm like, what happened to him? Did he come? Was anybody there on campus to greet him and take care of him? And I went from this moment of elation and excitement about this, how cool is it to take care of this student, to all of a sudden, who took care of him? What happened? We had great support staff here. I'm confident if he came, he would have been taken care of. But to this day, I have no idea what happened to him. That moment completely changed my trajectory in my focus in higher education. And my desire is not to get students in. I mean, I love that, and I think that's really awesome work. But my dream and my focus and my aspirations, I mean, as Dave introduced me, my personal work mission statement is I help people achieve their educational dreams. And to focus on helping somebody achieve their educational dreams, we need to be focused on, once you're here, helping you get connected, helping you find ways, to discover your major, to look at it and say, what discipline within my major do I want to do? To help people every step of the way to accomplish those goals. And that goes on well beyond when you graduate. When you get your diploma, you still will take advantage of, if you're smart, you will take advantage of the resources that Snow College offers you. And whatever school that you go to. Our job is to help people achieve their dreams. That moment, sitting at Delta High School and then I was in Chicago in this big, huge auditorium, that moment of, it wasn't shame, but it was like, holy cow, I've missed the whole point. That was an amazing pivot point for me. The last pivot moment I'll share with you. And I use the word pivot moment because these really are things that it literally, I was heading a certain direction. It paused me, and I'm like, I've got a whole new focus. And you'll notice in most of these pivot stories that we talk about, a lot of it's not in our control. And that's okay. That's how life works. Sometimes a big pivot will come to you. It's going to send you in a certain direction or send me in a certain direction. And you find, as you look back on that, how it influenced you and how it motivated you or how it demotivated you, depending on how that pivot moment happens. But the last one I highlight, and it's really quick, is so I learned really quickly here at Snow that I really loved enrollment management. I love the big picture. And I worked for the greatest enrollment leader that has ever existed. His name was Brock Schluter. He was a dean here. He was the greatest enrollment leader in mind I have ever met to this day. Just an amazing, amazing human being. He understood this innately. It was like he was born to help students get admitted and have success in school. And I wanted to be Brock. And I knew I didn't have the same charisma, the same skills that he had and everything else, but I knew that there was a way to become like that to oversee enrollment. So when I talk about enrollment, I'm thinking about all the way from recruitment to your advising, to your financial aid type stuff so that you're ready to register. You do all of your academic planning with your advisors, you go to registration, and then to help you all the way through making sure your grades are working, that you're getting your credentials that you've earned really well, and really helping you along the way and connecting you with career services and student success folks, and helping you transfer to other institutions, or whether that transfer is to another college or university or whether it transfers to a career. That was the dream. And I realized after being here for a while, working for the best in the entire industry, and he still had a good 10 years, 15 years before he was going to retire, I knew I needed to expand my horizons. And that's where I started this process, and I started to grow into this, and I took my position at BYU, where I wanted to get into the registrar space that had more or just different experiences within the enrollment management world that would give me more breadth and more depth and understanding it. And that really started my process. And my dream became to be a vice president, associate vice president. Every school has different levels, but I wanted to oversee enrollment services or enrollment management and student success. That was my dream. So 2 years ago, I'm sitting in Austin, Texas at the University of Texas, a school that I'm honored that they would want me to work there, that they recruited me to be there. I wasn't like an institution destination. I didn't have a dream of what school to work for, but I wanted this role. And University of Texas is a pretty prestigious institution. It's a highly selective, large institution in the state of Texas. It's the flagship. And I sat there in my office 2 days later, my empty office. I didn't have any pictures on the wall yet. I didn't have any of my books or anything else. As I'm standing there, I was sitting at my desk, almost complete clean slate, and I sat there and said, I'm here. Mark, you accomplished this. And it really caught me off guard that I got my dream. I was here doing exactly what I wanted to do. And then that inside voice started coming and said, now what? Did you earn it? That's always a question for me. I'm always worried, did I earn it? Did I prove that I was worthwhile? Did I prove that I had the skills to do this? Can I make a difference at a school like this? But I literally sat there and thought, now what? That has been another really important pivot moment for me. Because as we achieve our goals, we do move forward, and sometimes being in that goal, now my purpose is how do I do the awesome things I want to do and help other people do awesome so that we can make a difference for this institution. And so just because I achieved that goal doesn't mean it ended. And for me, from a career standpoint, it is a new pivot moment. It gives me opportunities to maybe be a coach more with staff and faculty who have interest in coming through, but I can work with students. And I can really make big changes on a campus that will help students be successful, to help them connect with faculty. All right, so like I told you, this really is about your story, not my story. But I'm hoping as we're talking about my pivot moments, maybe it triggered one or two of yours. We already talked earlier today, for any of you who didn't hear that, about a pivot moment of being at a school up at Utah State. There were some life events that happened, different major, and all of a sudden decided, you know what? I just discovered this amazing Snow College with this computer science program, and this is something I'm really interested in doing. And that pivot has really guided one of your fellow colleagues here to really help come and have an amazing experience here. So I hope as you think through this that some of those pivot moments might trigger you. You can see up on my slide here, I have a couple of things, and they're just 4 different concepts or just small topics that I want to highlight with you about what I think are 4 things that you could focus on to really help you create your own story, to leverage your time while you're here at Snow College to create greatness and to create your great story. And so the first thing I always want to highlight as we talk about this is I invite you to think about yourselves, to discover yourself. How many of you know what your greatest strength is? Oh, come on. If I asked you how many of you know what your greatest weakness is, you would all said, yep, I know it, right? But how many of you know what your great skills and strengths are? Some people are raising their hands. I'm going to ask this rhetorically. I don't want anybody to feel like they're in brag moment or shame moment. You know what I mean? But have you thought about that? What motivates you? What drives you? What is at your core? And so as I talk about discovering, the first phase in this, and the first step, I think, in your journey to deliver a great story is to know yourself. Last fall, I heard a talk from a lady named Michelle Craig, and it's one of my favorite quotes that I pulled out of it. And she said this: the more you understand your true identity and your purpose, soul deep, the more it will influence everything in your life. Simple quote, pretty easy to say, soul deep, so I think kind of funny. I have no soul. I have a soul, don't get me wrong, but I don't have any soul. But I think it's really important for us to get to know each other. The first thing to create a story and to create a journey is to understand ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, to understand what we're interested in. And so I always talk about in here that one of the great ways to do that discovery is to start asking some questions. Just ask yourself. These are personal questions. What is your major? Are you thinking about changing your major? Why did you choose chemistry? Why are you exploring 4 or 5 different classes to discover what you want? What is it about that? What makes it interesting to you? These are things that the personal connection to discover who you are and why these things, how it connects to you and your aspirations. I believe starting with yourself is really, really important. The next step that I suggest is to now start connecting, after you've focused on yourself and asking yourself questions, connect with what you're curious about. You know, have you ever wondered, a couple of weeks ago, we had this really cool event where this, was a Perseverance rover, flew out of the United States, had this tiny little journey to Mars. It was like a 6.5-month journey, right? It was so far away as they were having communications from the equipment, the rover, as they were doing their descent, that it would take 6.5 minutes before they could hear or see the feedback back. So it technically landed 6 minutes before we could hear. That's how far away they were. Have you ever wondered how they pulled that off? How in the world did they use, I don't have my cell phone on me, but they used a device, the technology that's in that rover is 10-year-old cell phone technology. That was what was best to transport there. How does that happen? Other things that you might be curious about, that I would encourage you to think about what curiosity, what triggers your interest. You know, have you ever wondered, why do I need to take English if I'm majoring in chemistry? He's nodding his head because we talked about chemistry. He's like, what does English have to do with this? I will do a little sidebar in this. Do any of you know who Dr. Fauci is? I mean, does anybody not know who Dr. Fauci is, right? Have any of you listened to him speak or watched how he communicates about this pandemic? Guess what his bachelor's degree was in? Anybody know? I'm almost tempted to have you Google it, but I won't. He had a Bachelor of Arts in the classics. Everybody know what the classics are? This is like theory. This is philosophy. This is old, boring stuff. Maybe not old, and maybe not boring. Maybe really relevant. For him, that's where he started was a Bachelor of Arts in Classics, and then he had a pre-med track that he was focused on. Imagine how those classics influenced how he relates today to us, how he communicates to us, how he tells a story. Is there value in knowing how to write and doing chemistry? Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But, other things that you might be, curious about. Have you ever wondered how, for example, if any of you worked with somebody who's a Down syndrome person or has autism? Any of you musicians out here, have you ever been curious how music therapy would help and support students who have, or individuals who have some type of a disability? There are all kinds of cool things if you think about it. I mean, this is beyond the existential questions like, who am I? Which is still a good question to ask. Is there a God? Why is the sky blue? That's still really cool curiosity, stuff that drives you and motivates you. But I suggest, even before you think about what you're doing in college, know who you are. Be curious about things in life. Be curious about the world, things that are happening around you. I promise you that will help guide you and make your experience so much more valuable wherever you go. Another one, and again, I apologize for reading this to you. I know it's a little bit light, but Eric Hoffer has a quote that I just love. In times of radical change, it's the learners who inherit the future, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to work in a world that no longer exists. I don't say that as a depressing quote, but it's a fantastic quote because as we've gone, I've been in this business 27 years. When I arrived here, we were doing scholarships out of a data perfect software program. Data perfect does not exist. It was kind of like the word perfect comparison to Word, if you know that history. It was an old, terrible piece of software that you had to use 5.5-inch floppy disks to put into a computer to do it. If that's still how I was managing and tracking scholarships today, I would be out of business. I couldn't do it. I've had to grow as I've gone, and that's where I think this is so important. When we talk about curiosity, it is the learners. And I invite you and encourage you to be a continuous learner. So while I hinted earlier that I wouldn't do this presentation and give you career service just discussion items or student success type quotes and really talking about how to be successful at school. That's not my point here. But in the skills section, if you're okay, I do have one slide in here that I think is quite meaningful. But so if you've started to understand who you are, and if you've started to figure out and think about what are you curious about, and I really encourage you to spend time. Turn off all the devices. Go hang up in the mountains here. Hang out in the park and really say, what do I wonder about? What am I curious about? How do people relate together? Whatever it is, foster that curiosity. The next step really is something that you can leverage here while you're in college, and that is just to focus on your skills. And when I'm talking about skills, I'm talking about really specific things. The gift of being here, and the reason, as she talked about, she's taking a bunch of different classes to kind of explore what she's interested in. The core skills that are delivered to you while you're in a college. Learn to code. Learn to under data and statistics. Understand math, understand chemistry, understand bio. Understand how people relate, human relations. Understand how societies work together, how people form and bond, how people make meaning of our relationships. Understand language. All those kind of things. Those type of skills, those are foundational skills that work in every one of the things that you're focused on. The reason why I talk about curiosity, the reason we talk about skills, if you had something, and again, I'll just use simply Mars rover as an example. If that's really your fascination, imagine now while you're in class and you're taking a class history. Why am I interested in history? And they're asking you to do a research paper in history. You now have something that you're interested in that you could write a historical paper on space exploration. You could write historical documents about what SpaceX did, Elon Musk, what Tesla's trying to do with their space program. You can talk about, what happened with the first landing on the moon. In history, it's now in context. And the reason why I highlight this is because once it's in context, it's easy to learn and it's fun. It's engaging. It's easy to write about it. A lot of those things that we have that create anxiety in us to write. I don't know about the rest of you, but to have to sit down and write a paper, holy cow, it takes me a while to work through all my weebie-jeebies to get to the point where I can actually focus and write something out. But when I'm passionate about it, when I'm excited about it because it connects with things I'm curious about or my big questions, it changes the world for me. And so this data that's up here, and I'm not even going to read it all to you. I hope that's okay. But there was a study done a partnership in 2014 with Gallup and Purdue. You've all heard of Gallup, the survey group before. Really exciting, different group. They asked people who were done with college, what type of events or activities happened while they're in college that made a difference? And you'll notice in there, if you're looking at this, big things for them was they got involved. They met a professor who deeply cared about them. They had somebody who was a mentor or a coach, whether it was a professor or a counselor or somebody who worked with them that encouraged them to focus on their goals and their dreams. Students who had actual internships and important focus type things like that, projects that covered multiple semesters, that made a difference for them. It actually didn't matter where they went in their research. What it did mean was it was who we were engaged with and how they connected with me and how they motivated me and I motivated them. I'm throwing in, and this may sound like it's a little bit out of the blue here, But one of the things that's so exciting for me, I have so much excitement and so much hope for you as students here. You will change the world. You will solve cancer. You will solve, and you will find discoveries that help us with anxiety and depression. You will help us solve things related to information or anti-information or bad information. One of the things that I encourage you to do is however you come about discovering truth and you understanding what truth is. You know, if you're in your science classes, you'll study, you'll learn about the scientific method. For some of you, there's a spiritual connection to discovering truth. For some of you, there's a nature connection to discovering truth. But one of the things that if I could give in part any suggestion, it would be focus on finding truth. Truth with a big capital T, all capital letters. One of the difficulties we face right now is you have more information at your fingertips than you've ever had in your entire life. Every one of us do. And a lot of that information is completely erroneous information. There's really cool technology out there right now, AI, that actually creates accounts, they're robots that are creating social media accounts that are publishing information that not one human being has reviewed. When I talk about discovering truth, you will help us old fogies, figure out how to filter through the truth and the falsehoods and the misleading to really help guide us, and you'll be able to kind of unfilter that. The last big bullet I want to highlight here is I really encourage you as you're thinking about this is to focus on pursuing your dream. We all have different dreams and they come at different times. My passion for my career kicked off realistically when I was in my early 30s. That's really when it started. I knew what I wanted and I thought I could really make a difference, and I was starting to see that I could make a difference. And so you notice we talked about who am I and focusing on what's interested to you. We talked about now asking questions. The fourth bullet is about going and doing. And one of the most important parts about this is in pursuing your dreams that I just really, really encourage. This is about doing. And this is about, it's okay to fail. I dare you to ask all of your professors if they've had 100% success in everything they've done. Every article they've written, did it get accepted? Every student that they ever interacted with, did every student become just like them, which is their dream? You know, do we all have successes? No. The only time failure is if you don't learn from it. Otherwise, it is one of the greatest gifts. Try, do, pursue it. There really is very little risk. If you don't, the risk is if you don't pursue your dreams, you will never move forward. How many of you have seen this quote before? Give somebody a fish they eat for a day, teach them to fish they eat for a lifetime. You like this idea? Pretty cool quote, right? It's intrinsically, we connect with it. I can't stand this. Not surprising. I'm standing here, why would I bring it up, right? Anybody see the flaw with this? The problem with this and what's wrong about it is no. You can teach somebody to do something, and until they do it, they don't learn how to fish and they won't eat. We have to create time for us to actually fish, to do the work, to go out there, to stand in the stream, put that fly line on, see what fish want. Enjoy the scenery while you're there and the peace and the tranquility you might get. But unless you choose to act and do and to pursue, you really won't accomplish and leverage what you're learning here. It really is about choices. You always have to throw in a good Dumbledore quote, right? You all can envision this moment in the story. It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It's our choices. The cool thing right now, and one of the things I hope that you think about after this convocation, is choices are at your discretion. You can choose what you want to focus on. You can choose who you take classes from. You can choose who you hang out with. Sometimes those are going to be great choices. Sometimes you may regret those choices. That's still good. It's totally okay. John Wooden, I threw one more in here. Success is never final. Failure is never fatal. It's courage that counts. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to give one more bonus step. This is something that means a lot to me. I promise you, as you're thinking about crafting your story and building your greatness, and you're leveraging Snow College to do that, the more you focus on other people, the greater your story will become. And again, David Brooks, and I am going to read this one. I hope you'll forgive me. Many of our society's greatest problems flow from people not feeling seen and not being known. Can you connect with that? I think every one of us would agree that that is one of the greatest challenges that we face right now. There's a core democratic trait that we all have to get better at, and that is the trait of seeing each other deeply. and being deeply seen. Kind of the theme of my talk today. So let me wrap up here, and I hope this is okay. If I could have, when I started this talk and as I was preparing it, I really hope there were a couple things that you might have heard from me or felt from me. And I really mean this. I am so excited about your generation. I'm so excited about what Snow College provides you and what you provide Snow College right back. Snow College is pointless without you. It is the interactions, it is the diversity of ideas, the diversity of thought, the diversity of backgrounds that makes it amazing. Your diversity and what you bring here brings value. You are valued. We love what you bring. I always encourage people to be purposeful and be intentional and think about what you want to do. Explore the world, find truth. This idea of choices, my greatest wish, and I saw a sign as I walked in here that I think validates it. Choose to stay in the game. Don't choose to sit on the sideline. Don't choose to leave it. Choose to stay in the game. Be part of it. We need you. We want you. We want you in society. We want you as friends and colleagues. We want you as family member. I cannot overexpress. I just hope that you understand that we believe in you. I truly believe that you will change the world. You will solve cancer. You will help us solve and find ways to deal with some of the most plaguing pandemics we deal with right now. And I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about disinformation. I'm talking about depression, anxiety, mental health issues. The disconnect that we have is we're not interacting together. You will build this most brilliant and amazing world. And the coolest thing about it is, some of the things that you will create won't work right. And then your kids or somebody younger than you will come in and fix that, and they will build on it. That's the beauty of life we have. So I'm going to stop now. I threw in a couple of cool authors here that I really am excited about. And I wanted to just give a couple minutes. I think we're right at the end of the time here. Are there any questions or thoughts before we end?
3 minutes for questions.
And if it's not a question, let me invite you to share. Is anybody willing to share something that came to mind about your pivot moment or about a story or about an opportunity? I'm not trying to force anybody and call anybody out. Please understand that's sometimes awkward. But is there a question or something you'd like to talk about?
I'd like to share. So I've gone through a few pivot moments, and I just want to say that it's always worth it to keep going and stick it through, even if you feel kind of bad about it. It's always worth it to keep going.
I think so. I really appreciate that. It is worth sticking it out. Sometimes we change. Sometimes the sticking out is as we find a new opportunity. That's totally cool. That's part of the choices in learning and asking good questions. Well, I'm looking at the clock here. I'm seeing the time, and I know you all have classes. Dave, any last thing?
I have one last question. I wanted to give you one of my favorite quotes.
We did it. Hooray. Does anybody know that reference? Oh, thank you. My son wanted me to quote this. And I said, nobody will get the reference. It's from Dora, the great Spanish explorer. Sorry, Dave.
Well, and I saw the quote for Dumbledore. I thought of your kids too. But one of my favorite quotes comes from an author, Cormac McCarthy. And he said, it's a novel. And there's a son and a father. The son, and the world is terrible. The son asks the father, have you done anything brave in your life? And the father says, well, I got up today. Does that quote, when you hear that quote, how does it relate to what you're trying to say?
Personally, it almost makes me cry. So I apologize for being emotional about it. There are times in our lives and times in my life that things were so difficult and it was so challenging that the greatest success I had of that day was just getting up. And you know what? I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I was able to get up. And as I've watched others to get up, it is such a great quote and a great thought. And that really is about this. Do what you can. Don't expect, we put so much pressure on ourselves. We don't need to think that we can make it to Mars today. We can dream about it though, right? And we can think about it, and we can take one step closer to those goals and those dreams. And as we learn from it, we may sidestep that and try another different step. And I promise you, as you do those side steps, and as you move forward, you will get to a part in your career. And I'm not ready to retire yet, some of us. But I'm not there yet. I've still got a good 15, 20 years left, and I have a lot more I want to accomplish and learn. And I'm confident that as I take those steps forwards, it's going to lead me in a place and a direction that I never anticipated that was more fulfilling more exciting, more scary, and will actually help me be able to create the story that I'm becoming. And so thank you all for letting me come. It really is an honor to be here, such a great place, and I wish you all the greatest success.